all the souls that are trying to stay healthy, or get home to where they came from because they can at this point in time. Watch over all the fire and rescue, sheriffs, those men and women that serve this country abroad, especially all those at sea, for they have nowhere to go. Bless the meeting and the folks here to make decisions this evening. In your name we pray, amen. Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have Mr. Thomas and Mr. Underwood?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure because I didn't see on the screen, so I was just looking. Well, that's all right. I just want to make sure they were there and they could hear us.
Start talking, they should pop up.
Okay. Opening board comments. Mr. Forehand?
Just briefly, as we go through this, wanted to just encourage everybody to stay diligent and bless those that have to stay home with your children that aren't used to doing so. Our family of we have 4 children, and it is trying patience like they've never been tried before, and I understand that is a fairly common theme amongst parents. So bless you, and alcohol sales are up by 60%, and for obvious reasons. So that's it. Thank you.
Mr. Black?
Makes you appreciate teachers more, right?
Yes.
I have a couple, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Culley for your handling of the situation so far. I mean, going through a pandemic, there's no guidelines for going through a pandemic. So I think the last major one we had was 1918, 1919. So I want to thank you for handling all the emails and communication that's been going out. I also want to thank our public safety. I know I get a lot of notifications on my phone when they have to. That's fire, EMS, Sheriff's Department, all of them for doing what they have to do. A lot of them don't have a choice, but they have to go out and serve the public, and people still have medical needs and emergencies that they are relied on by our community still. So a huge shout out to them. I do want to piggyback on that. The YMCA, I talked to the director of the YMCA today. She said that they will be delivering baskets to some of our fire stations and our Sheriff's Department, just kind of as a thank you to those employees. So that will be going on during the pandemic, throughout the pandemic. I do want to thank, we had a trash pickup on Ladysmith Road from Route 1 to the Sassafras Shade Winery. That took place this past Thursday. It was a huge success. We actually had 15 volunteers. I think there was a lot of people that just want to get out of the house. It was a beautiful day. We were able to pick up 23 bags of trash during that time frame in basically an hour and a half, so thank you. Finally, Mr. Culley, I would like to, I ask you if it's possible for you to send us the internet policy for the county employees, if that's possible. I have concerns that if an employee was disgruntled in any way, shape, or form, I would hate to see, I mean, we're elected officials, so if someone wants to blast me on social media, then that's what I signed up for. However, I just don't want to see, it's a balancing act because people have freedom of speech, I understand that. But I just don't want to see any department head, and our department heads work hard, or yourself, have to go through that from a county employee. So if you could just send that to us, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Black. Mr. Underwood.
No opening comments at this time.
All right, thank you, sir. Mrs. Long.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, I do have a point of concern I wanted to address today. At our organizational meeting each year, we agree to represent different boards and groups throughout the county and to serve on different committees, be they federal, state, local boards. And we agree to serve, and then the board votes on those positions and approves them. So what I'd like to ask of this board is that if you have a issue with one of these organizations, that you contact that representative. To not contact the appointed representative to that board is not only disrespectful to that person, but also to the whole board, because it undermines our unity of working together. Such an action also places that representative, your liaison to that board, in an embarrassing situation when they're unaware of what's been said and they walk into a meeting and are asked for what's going on. So it only serves to weaken our county's position within that board when that type of thing happens. So let's please be mindful of one another and our positions and our duties. And this situation's happened to me twice, and I just am hopeful that it's a misunderstanding of what appropriate protocol is, and I really would like to see it not happen again. Therefore, Mr. Chair, if you could request of Mr. Seeley that staff maybe compile a reference list of all the different committees
Sure.
and meetings, what their purpose is, and who the representative is for this term, and that representative's quickest or best contact number. That way, if something comes up, we have no excuse not to go to that reference list and be able to call them so that we're all on board and working together in a better way. And then I'd also like to express my appreciation to the staff, Fire and Rescue, Public Works, IT, and all the other departments for all the adjustments that you've made working with your routine and continuing to serve and protect not only the county, but your families, your co-workers, and all citizens. And to the citizens, thank you for following recommended guidelines, and I just ask that you hold the line. This is an unseeable attacker, and we can't afford to get careless. So don't confuse necessity with want. Continue to be patient, to encourage one another, and to take this time just to appreciate the gift of life that surrounds us, and we'll get through this together. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Long. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few, and if you'll indulge me, I should have quite a few thank you. I think in the last meeting, I thanked the folks that work at Food Line and the drugstores, and wanted to make sure we include them again. But of course, thank the county employees who continue to serve the citizens and basically keep the county going. So again, a thank you to them. A thank you to A. Smith Bowman Distillery for their donation of pure alcohol so the fire and rescue could make hand sanitizer when we were extremely low a couple weeks ago. A thanks to Max Urgent Care for their quick response and all the things they're doing to help the county. It was great to bring the first and only urgent care facility to the county a couple of years ago, and they're definitely showing how much they're worth. A special note to Legions of Valor. They donated 2 laptops to nonprofits for kids who needed them right now, which was a great thing. And that's it for the thank you. I attended a Virginia Technology conference call this afternoon regarding broadband. I believe I sent an email to each of the board members and Mr. Cullen. Basically, that gives us an idea of what we're doing in August when we try to apply for another grant to expand broadband in the county. So I'll try to keep the board members abreast of what's going on there. And the last thing I have is there has been much ado about the demographics of the lethal nature of this particular virus. And one of the things that the studies have shown is the virus is more fatal in areas where the income or employment is fairly low. And we have quite a few people like that in the county, so we need to make sure that, as all the other board members have said, we're vigilant and we keep doing what we're doing. Again, it highlights the fact that we've got an urgent care facility that can help. So thank you for that time. I appreciate it. And that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm going to go through my list of thank yous as well, and I want to start off with the sheriff's office. I know that at this point in time, the number of sirens that I've heard for fire and rescue and the sheriff's office going up and down 301 and down through AP Hill has been amazing. The first responders, I hear, it's interesting when you live by the fire station, you can actually distinguish which sirens are for which vehicles. So, and I do hear the first responders and the fire trucks actually responding quite a bit, and I want to thank those folks as well. I want to talk a little bit about Public Works, and in particular the transfer site. Are they part of Public Works, Mr. Cully? I've been trying to clean up limbs, and I was astounded at the amount of traffic at the transfer sites. It is unbelievable, and people, as I see them throwing stuff, I've heard people, I'm cleaning out stuff that I've wanted to clean out for the last 10 years, and I'm home and I can now do it. And it's actually gonna cause us some issues here down the road, because 50% of the trash that goes to the landfill sites is from restaurants. With restaurants closed, the actual influx of trash has gone way down, so the landfills are actually cutting their hours. So our ability to empty boxes in our compactors is gonna get more difficult because the hours of operation are shortened. But I could not believe the traffic. It was like somebody was giving something away here in Bowling Green, and the amount of limbs and just metal and trash, it was unbelievable. So I want to just say thanks to all the folks at those transfer sites, because they are really, really busy. Public Works, all those guys that have to work on water lines and sewer lines, we all get those breaks when they come over the Caroline alerts. This line's broken, that's line is broken. So it's a tax on all of them, along with all the other things they have to do. And I will echo the sentiments of the rest of the board with Food Lion, the drugstore, the restaurants. I mean, all those folks that are staying open and trying to keep everybody, at least give you some normalcy. You can go get something to eat and take it home, though you can't stay. It does actually break up your day. It's the only place that I've been. And lastly, for those of you who know, I'm a beekeeper, and this is bee season, and I actually have a hive of bees that's going to Port Royal to the church. As soon as they came a little distraught, they got held up in the mail for 4 days. Not a pretty picture, and I'm doing some resuscitation on them before they actually go to their permanent site down in Port Royal, but they're on their way for those that are interested. And those are my opening board comments. Amendments to the agenda. I was gonna add one thing, and it's about PACS urgent care and actually giving the county a tool to be able to test. They've actually offered us a really good deal, but it's more expensive than Mr. Colley can actually just spend, so I was gonna make that under new business and make it 6A.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to discuss the emails from social services as well as emails about social services. If I could add that to the agenda.
We'll add it. Yeah.
And you'll see on your printed agenda, we removed the C off of consent. And also, we're going to remove number 4. Curtis, we had sent him home yesterday for issues. So, help, preventative issues with corona type things.
Mr.
Oh, it's at number 1. Yeah, presentation, number 1.
Oh, it's not
Yeah,
number
I got the
4,
right
it's
one. I got the
number
right
1.
number. Trying to look, yeah. Not number 4. We want number 1 removed. Sorry, looking down too far. Thank you, Alan.
All right, you've heard the amendments. A motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
A second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? What did I?
read you was saying aye.
Oh, okay. It caught me wrong. Since we have no presentations, we are to the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, would move that the consent agenda be accepted as presented.
Second.
Question, Mr. Chairman?
Reggie has a question.
Mr.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, just to make sure, the Virginia Bazaar is in the Mattapan district. Are we going to defer all of these that are outstanding until we can get together again, or do we have a legal, we do have a legal requirement, but if the applicant and the county agree, we can extend them as much as we want?
Mr. Emerson on?
I'm sorry, I was muted. Yes, if the applicant agrees, you can extend it indefinitely. If you have a zoning issue that comes up to you, you can defer it for up to a year yourself without the applicant consenting to it. And there is a lot of discussion amongst county attorneys about, and differences of opinion about what should be taken up in these remote electronic meetings and not. The Attorney General's opinion is that essential business should be taken up and not non-essential business, but nobody has really defined that in any way. So it's somewhat of a gray area. But basically, unless there is some immediate harm or some reason why timing is really important, I would have a tendency to defer things until a more normal time.
Okay, and I just want to make sure my point and reasoning is clear. In this particular case, we deferred it to give the applicant an opportunity to find a new prospect. And with all that's going on, I'm sure the applicant has not had the opportunity to find a new prospect or even the old prospect. So I'm just saying we're going to defer this one now, but the board needs to be mindful of deferring this one again and any other ones that come up in that sense. So that's all. Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Chairman. We can move on.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. I guess we can go to new business, and I guess this is Beth Curran, number 4.
That should be Charlie.
Or is it you? Oh, it's you, okay. I don't know what, you putting that up on the screen? Oh, okay. It is up. As they blow up.
Mr. Thomas and Mr. Underwood and the other staff should be able to see this. Curtis got me this information that's all in red, and it comes out of the 400, it's all negatives, because revenues are basically in a fund account are negative numbers. And it's a lot tougher to run this on the laptop. But what I did was, so we looked at FY19 actuals. So the numbers in red or purple up there on the screen, red on my screen, those are April, May, and June of 19 actual revenues. And then the grand total would be that quarter, that last quarter of revenue. So I've created a chart where I can put my own reduction in and show you what that potential loss would be. And then this, so that's the first column over on your right where my pointer is. And then if you look at that, the difference is the difference between the two. And also, I created a column that's sort of permanent loss, because not all revenue that while it might be down, would be permanently lost. And real estate and personal property would be one of those, because you're going to collect most of that. Even if people are late paying it, the treasurer's office will still be going after that. So we will be sending delinquent letters, and we'll eventually get that. So I've got, a slight loss on those. But as you move down the chart, off of things that would be taxes, and what I've got right now, personal property at 15%, real estate things at 10% reduction, machinery and tools at 10, things like motor vehicles 10, interest 15%, local sales tax, I got that off 50%, and we can adjust that to 75. Consumer utilities and things, most people still have their phones, so those are being taken off their phone bills and reverted back to us. But the things that are big, business license, probably 75% loss due to the lack of fuel sales, maybe. And then transient occupancy tax, I've also got that at 75. And then meals tax at 75. Now those may be high, we may not lose that much, but we don't have any way of knowing. But what that shows you is that's about $2,700,000 worth of loss, but of the permanent loss, it's really only about $1 million, and I think that's probably close to worst case scenario with all those things being off. The problem in talking, and Beth can jump in here because she's online with us. When you start looking at meals tax and sales tax, we don't get some of that sales tax information. We just get in January's and that type of thing in now in March and April. So it'll be May before I kind of know what March looked like. So I'm going to have a tough time telling you how bad this quarter is till it's almost over. And that's just the nature of the way we get things back from the state. So I think you can figure with things closed, that sales taxes are going to be down, although the grocery stores are still open and the hardware stores are still open, and a lot of the stores that we have like that aren't restaurants where there people gather, we still should be making some sales tax money, and maybe making record-breaking sales tax out of 2 grocery stores. But anyway, your thoughts. We can change any of these things. You can see you can change meals tax to minus 65, and you'll see how that lowers that number. So it's just something to give you an idea of all of our general fund revenues. And of course, the meals tax isn't in the general fund; it's actually in the other funds because it goes against debt service, which means if it's low, then I got to make up debt service payments with general fund revenue. So we just look at it all. So it's even though it's not, and some of these others aren't either. Consumers utility tax, and some of those things are also in that other funds and are just totally revenue against debt service. But in that you've got to pay debt service, it doesn't matter. It just ultimately come from the fund balance. So the one thing that's good is that we do have an extremely strong fund balance that we've been able to maintain now for 5 or 6 years. It was what helped with our bond rating, and it does provide some buffer that even if we were to take an initial $2 million hit, we are not going broke. I wouldn't want it to sustain at that level by any stretch of the imagination. But it's not, we're going to turn, we won't be able to pay our bills, I don't think. Now we do have in July and August, big debt payments. And so we're going to, hopefully people will pay that can pay their real estate and their personal property, to get that paid. And about 47% of our real estate's paid by mortgage companies. So that should be coming in, basically on time, on the due date. So if we get the real estate bills out, those mortgage companies will start paying. So, which is
Mr.
good.
Cole, you said about 46 to 48%?
46, 47% in between that maybe is all mortgage. So that's sitting in people's escrow. That'll come. Right. And I think there's a lot of, as bad as this situation is in the unemployment and in all of those things, there's still a lot of our folks still working and still, have the ability, to pay their taxes on their property that they have. Not all, but I think it's still a majority you know, people that own their own homes and those type of things. Yes, there are going to be people that can't, but I don't think we're at a majority point of that yet. Might get there, but I don't think we're at that. I mean, just, you know, like I said, you look at the people that are still able to work.
I have a question when you have a chance.
I'm good.
Mr. Thomas?
Well, you've got at the bottom 203,000 in meals tax, and pretty much that's going to be a loss because as we've discussed, folks are not going to go out and eat 2 or 3 meals to make up for what they didn't eat last quarter. So that money is geared for school capital projects. Can we direct that any way we wish so that capital projects we're planning on paying would be backed up by the general fund? I mean, if you understand.
Other funds that it's revenue for is school and county debt. It's not broken down any more beyond that. So it's in the budget, other funds I can show you actually in the budget. So it's the revenue side, and we do a general fund transfer to that same spot usually of $5 million as well. So it's just revenue that pays debt service both school and county.
Okay, so instead of, I think our debt service for schools is like $5 million a year. So instead of paying 4.8 million because we had this 200,000, we'd actually have to pay 5 million. Okay, so it's not necessarily a double hit.
No.
It's just one hit that's going to have to come from the unencumbered balance.
What I would anticipate on this chart, if you look at that bottom number, the way the percentages are now, in the rightmost column, K, 1,043,753 is coming from the fund balance to make up for these lost revenues.
We can't see K, or at least I can't.
You must be hidden in your, is it something on your screen? I don't know if I can go any further.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine.
How's that?
Well, you can go back. I had to shrink the pictures of the other people. All right.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, that's fine.
Yeah, that K column is what I would consider to be permanent loss in this worst case scenario on here. And so that would all, and that's in this current year. That's in FY20. And what I would hope is that we normally finish, you know, on a positive note, revenues to expenditures anyway, underspending the budget, that we'll do the same. We're going to work really hard. Curtis and I are both working really hard looking at what we currently have and what we've currently spent and what we currently have to pay in payroll and fixed cost. And I'm going to, you know, be working with department heads, and we're not going to spend anything we don't have to. And so we're going to mitigate as much of that 1 million as we possibly can, maybe all of it. May not end with, you know, a positive at the end of the year, but at least not a huge negative.
The last thing for me is, have you asked all the other departments to not spend anything for the rest of the quarter?
We have. We're trying to only do emergency spending or things that we've finished up a couple of projects that we had, like a paving project where we had pulled apart the convenience site, poured the concrete, and then we had a trip hazard, and it was just, so it was a few things like that that I've just had to finish up. But yeah, most everything else we put the stops on. The main thing we've been spending on now is the emergency, which we hope we're going to get backed up on by the federal government on our expenditures, and we're tracking all those that we're going to hopefully get some reimbursement from FEMA on.
Yeah, Mr. Cully, that was kind of my question too, was regarding the kind of freeze on unnecessary spending. But do we have any idea how much we're spending regarding this emergency at this point, that we think we may get some funds back from the state or federal?
We may be heading toward 100,000. We weren't there yet, but and I don't have Chief in here, and Chief Loftus is kind of tracking all that, and may have a number. Is he coming in now? Chief, can you hit on the emergency? Good, but the microphone.
We're close to 100 between the two departments, about 97,000.
That was a pretty good guess for.
That's pretty good. So, Mr. Cully, you say, what I hear you saying is, based on your numbers in terms of impact to the general fund, for revenue that may not come back, you're saying worst case may be around $1 million. Is that correct? Just guesstimation.
Right. And it's based on just, taking the things that are consumer-based, like meals tax and sales tax, and cutting those way back.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Black?
Yeah, I just want to make a kind of statement here, and I think it's pretty important. Over the last several years, we've been up until this point, we've been in pretty good economic times. I mean, I think there's no question about it. And over that time, and it's a testament to Mr. Cully's budgeting and the board, we've built up a fund balance. And I know we've gotten in budget cycles, we've gotten questions about, hey, here's an unencumbered balance, and why does a board of supervisors put money in? And the answer is basically it's a rainy day fund for something like this. This is emergency money. This is why we do it, because it's going to be very hard to raise taxes, and during a difficult time when people don't have jobs, and that's why you build that fund up, so you have something when a situation like this arises. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Black.
And I would add to that, it's why I think it's important to the bond rating agencies when we were up there a couple of years ago, that they saw that they knew we would be able to pay our debt.
And it makes it easier for us it makes it cheaper for us to borrow money. Yeah, absolutely. So it's a win-win. So thank you.
And the other point, FEMA money could take up to 2 years to get. So even if we have a big bill that goes to FEMA that they agree to pay, we could be a very long time waiting for those funds to actually show up. Any other questions? All right.
That's good. I think the point is we're really just estimating though, and we hope that the worst case is the worst case.
I could change those percentages to, worse and worse and worse and make the number bigger and bigger. But I think realistically, we may have some people not able to pay their personal property bills, but I think ultimately a lot of those folks will if we give them some time, and Beth works with them, and every year not everybody pays their personal property bill, and we work with them and search them down and do all we can with DMV stops and all those things. So I think at a point of time, at some time in the future, we'll recover, a fair amount of the taxed money. I'd still believe it's the user money that you can't go back and relive these 3 months of closure and gain.
Oh, right, and it's not disparaging at all. It's the reality of we're making an educated guess, but our educated guess is really, based on factors we can't include. So that's all I'm saying is it could be worse than this. It could be better than this. But thanks for the quality guess that you made.
With that, we're going to move into agenda item number 5, which is the discussion of deferral of penalties and interest on the June 5th real estate and personal property tax payments. I know that the federal government has actually pushed tax day to, I think, July 15th? July 15th. For those that are procrastinators, they have a long time this year. And I know that I don't believe that the state has moved. The state taxes are due a month after federal, so they're usually due June 15th. So is it May 1st?
State taxes normally due May 1st. I don't know that they've moved state taxes much beyond June yet.
I thought for some reason it was okay.
And the difference in the federal tax moving from April to July, it's still within the federal calendar.
Right.
If we move past June, we're switching budget years, so it's easier for them to move from April to July than it is for us to cross to July. So we'll point that out. That's why Beth, and she's on here, can speak to that even going to June 30th and stuff really jams us up with things that she has to do to close out the year. So Beth, please join in this discussion.
All right. Yes, we had talked about extending the due date.
Lost Beth. We're gonna try again, Beth. Hold on a second.
Her sound went away.
You pushed the wrong button. Beth, we weren't hearing you. We heard you initially, then you stopped.
Okay, well, I didn't change anything. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay. We looked at changing the date to something past June 5th, because if we're gonna change the penalty and interest dates, we need time to get that advertised so that we can put something on the tax bills. But if we go to the end of the month, then normally what we do is we stop updating information so that utilities can get the bills sent out, and we can get information together for the auditor. So that would put us not being able to update information, because we would then jam up the audit information and not be able to balance the utilities for them. And that was one of the things that Ann had asked us to work on, which we have been trying to get that straight for the coming audit. But I feel like June 15th would give us time to get the payments in. It normally takes us about 2 weeks to get the mail in, and we would be able to get those posted and have everything ready for year end.
The penalties and interest.
Well,
We were-
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Kern.
okay, I'm sorry. I felt like the penalties and interest, if we gave them another to the middle of August to do the penalty amount, that's the part that's truly what I feel is a penalty for not paying, is the 10%. But to give the folks incentive to pay, even some of the mortgage companies, I'm not sure will pay by the June 15th due date if there's no ramifications if they don't get it paid by then. So by charging interest on that app, and it's not significant, but it is an additional charge that I don't think some folks are going to want to pay, and they will get those taxes paid by the due date.
So your recommendation is 0% interest rate until July 15th, and then the penalty is 0 penalty until August 15th.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation. I think some of the other, I'm not sure what Spotsylvania has done. I think I believe King George was proposing something similar, and I think Orange County, who's similar in size to us, has gone with a July 20th with penalty and interest. But
yeah. Well, this to me is a really good plan. We have a totally different rule than the federal government because we have to have a balanced budget. But this shows that we're at least trying to work with our citizens, especially the ones who've lost their job and may need a little more leeway before they can make that payment. So I think this is a good thing.
and then we'll work with folks if they that they need to make payments. We can after the penalty is applied. So I mean, we wouldn't start any kind of collection actions, obviously, at this time.
Now, the one last thing is the penalty by state code.
It's by county ordinance.
Okay. That's what I wanted to make sure. I know in some cases the federal government says I can't do anything. The penalties are, federal code. So, okay.
Is there any way we can, after the fact, figure out what the actual ending year balance was for 2020? Retroactively, like August 1st, is that going to roll backwards into the 2020 budget? Or are we going to snap a line June 30 and start a new budget July 1st, and then all that revenue goes into July? I'm just kind of curious how we track. Beth, you got any suggestions or ideas?
Well, I do, because for the audit purposes, we're on an accrual basis. So the months of July and August will automatically be added into what the current budget information. So, I mean, that was one reason for trying to, at least charge the penalty before that 60 days is up.
Makes sense.
So we really will get a true picture of the 2020 budget.
Yes, other than the fact that the information I gave to Alan is that last year we collected about $92,000 in penalty, I believe, from June 6th through the end of August, because I was running it through that 60 days. So we won't have the 90-some thousand, but we'll have, some that are late after August 15th. It just won't be as much.
That additional money would then roll into next year. So say it was 90,000 last year from June 6th to August 30th, then if we only have August 15th to 31st, then September, all that penalty doesn't go away, it's just gonna be in the 21 budget as revenue for penalties. Follow? So it's not lost, it's just gonna switch years.
It gets counted for in another year.
Right.
You said June 6th?
Due day, so June 6th was typically the date of penalty and interest. But that won't be the case this year.
Right.
I like it. So we go.
I'll take a motion. Or
Can I make a motion from here?
can Ben, hold on for a second. We need to hear from Mr. Emerson.
Yes. I can make a motion? Yes, you can do that. So I will. Motion. Do you need more, Mr. Seeley?
Needs to have a sunset clause, right? Is that what Mr. Emerson was suggesting?
Say again?
I couldn't hear.
You had suggested in the action that you need a sunset, we would want to do a sunset clause on it because we'll really just cover this year.
Yes, I think that would be a good idea.
And it's emergency ordinance, correct, Ben?
Right, that's correct. So it will have to,
It's only good for 60 days.
yeah, since it's going to last beyond that, we're going to have to advertise and pass it normally with a public hearing, or you could probably grant another emergency ordinance in 60 days to keep it going.
Yeah, 60 days gets us to June 14th.
Correct. That's what I was just doing is where does that get us to? And it gets us to June. So we'd have to then at our May meeting
Do it again.
is do it again to get us to
Yeah.
July.
Or advertise it and adopt it, normally. You'd have to do one or the other.
Needs to go to August because August 15th is.
Correct.
All right, well, let's just do it like this, and then we'll do another emergency ordinance, because we're not gonna have a public hearing for folks that are gonna come who say they wanna pay their taxes ahead of time.
It does seem silly.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna make the motion that we move ahead with the deferral of penalties and interest on the June 5th real estate and personal property tax payments.
Motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Well, it's only good for 60 days currently, so we're gonna have to come back to this.
The emergency ordinance.
Right, the emergency ordinance. Right, we have to, right. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carries. Mr. Forehand. Agenda item number 6, consideration of incremental appropriation for fiscal year 2020, 2021 budget. Now, my understanding is this is going to be difficult because getting quarterly numbers is not something that's easily gotten. Mr. Colley?
Yeah, anytime you're having, our budget doesn't divide into months or quarters easily due to the different payments that we end up having to make. And it's not that it can't be done. You'll just be adding work to the finance staff, which is pretty much overworked now. I'm trying to add, auditing help in there now. to be able to try to plan out with our various departments what they may spend in a quarter. You know, the big fixed things we know. We know all of our quarterly things that we pay to outside agencies and the jail and all those things. Those are easy to divide up. But then when you're trying to figure all your other spending, then that takes a little bit of time. So, I mean, that would be the smallest increment that I would want to go to from an appropriation standpoint would be quarterly. And Beth clearly needs to speak to this as well as to, you know, how it impacts her operation and the ability, but that you can't write checks for what hadn't been appropriated. And clearly in this environment, and I think we've shown since I've been here, we're good stewards of the money. We're going to be watching everything coming in and going out as close, if not closer than we ever have in the past. But we'll do whatever the board wants to do, but know that it's not just as easy as, you know, are we just going to appropriate? You'll be involved in those appropriations if it's on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis.
May I address this, Mr. Chairman?
Mrs. Long had her mic on, so I'm going to let her go first.
My thought is, as we've said before, we've been good stewards through your good management. We have the rainy day fund. Therefore, I would think to decrease workload and continue as we have been, if we need to pull more from the emergency funds, we do. Interest rates are really low right now, so even if we needed to do borrowing for a short period of time, but we're obviously not going to be able to increase staff this year. So increasing the workload on staff seems to me to be counterproductive, and that's my thought.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, I had asked Mr. Cully to look into this before. We talked about this several years ago when it came to appropriations. The reasoning behind this is we normally appropriate $14-15 million to the school system July 1st. It's not actually handed to them. We still have it. And my concern was with the unknowns of our revenue for the fourth quarter and our unknowns of the revenue for the first quarter. If we encumber $14 or $15 million for the schools right now, we'll have to go back at some point in time and say, I'm sorry, guys, but we need $1 million or some of that money back. By doing it quarterly, we would at least be able to manage our funding a little bit better, and the board could be able to watch it a little closer. So that's why I wanted to do it. Mr. Cully said monthly was way too much work, and I concur with that. Based on what he said, I'm sure Beth would agree. Quarterly, maybe a little easier to do and not quite as much work. I hope Beth would agree with at least a quarterly.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah, Mr. Cully, so just again, how difficult is it to do quarterly? Is that, is it really cumbersome to do it? And I wouldn't even look at monthly. I think that's too difficult. But really, in your opinion, and this is current, how difficult is it to appropriate the funding quarterly?
Well, I would say that we can certainly do quarterly easier. And one thing that, and number one, we don't have to do it tonight because until we adopt a budget, and then you can decide to appropriate it. But that would certainly be, if I'm going to do one, preferred. And maybe the compromise on that is we appropriate the first quarter and see where we are. And if we, appropriate the second quarter and see where we are, and maybe we get to the middle of the year and we appropriate the second half. Eventually, even the schools are going to have people on contract and they've hired employees and all this. And so a bulk of what they spend is all in salaries and health insurance and things like that. They don't really buy a lot of other things, out of their total budget. It's 90% personnel, I think. It's extremely heavy, way more so than the county side.
Right.
Once they've done their budget, they're going to be planning on spending it whether you've appropriated it or not. So it's going to be some sort of one way or the other anyway with them, but so anyway, we could certainly support the quarterly, especially we could take a look at it after we've done a quarter and see how things are going. We might could do the rest of the year. If not, do another quarter and see.
Yeah, I would just hate for us to borrow money if we had another alternative. Should we, like, we don't really know what the ending is going to be, but I certainly would want to borrow money to help us move along and sustain us if at all possible, when we could possibly could have a better solution that would cost us nothing. So that's my concern about, but I'll do whatever. I'll certainly willing to look at it with the rest of the board.
Yeah, and again, my reasoning behind this is not to highlight schools or criticize schools in any way. They just happen to be the largest really appropriation that we make. So we are going to more than likely fund everything they want during the course of the year. But by doing it quarterly, we at least get a chance to see what the county finances are, and really reassure us. So I'd even be willing to go with the compromise of we do the first quarter, we do the second quarter, and then we go from there if things are better. If not, we stick to quarterly.
Hey, Beth, you have any comments on the quarterly system?
Well, I think the quarterly, as long as you all were doing it a quarter, like, you would have to approve like the second quarter at the September meeting, because we would need to be able to spend money before that board meeting.
Right.
And I'm not sure, I need to look at the debt service that goes out in July and August to see if that's over like a quarter, because it's a sizable chunk of our debt payments. So I don't know if we could do quarterly for the debt retirement fund.
Yeah, because we pay debt service on not a regular schedule. I know we have something scheduled in July and September, which is a lion's share of our debt service, which is probably larger than a quarterly payment. Mr. Black?
Ms. Curran, how much more of staff time would this take to do quarterly? How much more of I guess, a hassle would it be for your staff to do the quarterly? And Mr. Cully too, from the county perspective? Well,
I mean, it's not so much as on us. We're just not able to spend the money if the appropriation is not there. The problem, I mean, the staffing need is going to be in the finance department.
Yeah, so normally when you appropriate, it's easy. You've got the budget, we bring you the budget and you appropriate all the amounts.
It is a lot.
And so when you're going to go down to a quarter, then you got to look at what you're going to spend in that quarter. So then we got to work with Beth on debt service. What is the actual payment? Because I know in the budget what I owe for the year, because I got it in the budget. I don't know when we're paying that. Beth does. Right. So I got to go, all right, and we don't, and so we pay for each line item, sometimes twice. You pay interest twice a year and principal once a year, and they're in different months. And so all that stuff's got to be figured out, along with then going to the department heads. What, other than payroll, because we can give you what payroll is going to be monthly, what are you anticipating that you're going to have to do? You've got this contract, you've got this service contract, we've got Worldview for the internet, all those things, and they're not all the same all the time. They don't divide up into math. We divide up into math in 12 months and give you that. So that one is all this process of the budget. But then it's spent, y'all see it, and you get, like in your packet tonight, you get a bills list, and we're working our way through all that. But then for most people haven't tried to figure out, all right, I got to spend this in a certain time frame. So it's work. I can't tell you exactly how much, but it'll definitely be work for finance and department heads to figure out, like Loftus and Mr. Schiebel both have big departments having to try to figure that. The sheriff's office trying to figure out what they're going to spend. And sometimes those things become unknowns with, repair bills and all that kind of stuff. So you have to kind of appropriate more than you thought you'd need.
Right. I guess my question, Mr. Cully, then is this here, because in our board packet, it said quarterly appropriations could be made, but staff and Ms. Curran believe the desired objective could be more easily accomplished by requiring the treasurer and finance director to provide a monthly revenue and expense summary. Can you kind of explain that?
Even though from the treasurer side, they don't close the month every month, she could provide reports of where we were with unclosed revenue. So when we say closed, what we mean is the checks, the revenues, all the accounts, everything balances and the books are closed for that month. And there's nothing that's changed in those things except by journal entry and the auditor and that kind of thing. And then you move on into the next month, everything. Sort of like balancing your personal checkbook every month. Hey, everything has come in, everything is balanced. It's just a lot more involved in the treasurer's office with that. But we could provide what we haven't, because we haven't needed to. Where are we with revenues compared to, and where we are compared to revenues the year before in the same time period? And Beth can speak to that in more detail.
All right, so we have balanced, like Mr. Cully was asking today about revenue. So we have balanced all the journal entries we need for the revenue for March. So, you know, if you asked me today to do a March revenue report, I could give it to you with, you know, certainty. We're still working on the balance in the bank statement. So the expenditures, they're posted, but just not reconciled. But by the time you all have a board meeting going forward, we could give you a report that had, you know, bank account reconciled. There might be an adjustment. Like right now, I've sent the reports off to the school board for February because they've been out. So trying to get them to review those and make sure we don't have any like adjustments to make between funds or line items. So we could give you a report at that first board meeting of the revenues and expenditures so you would know where we were, and the system would provide it. So I don't think it would be a whole lot of extra time to generate that.
Thank you, Mrs. Curran. Mr. Underwood, Mr. Thomas, any other questions?
No, Mr.
No other questions for me.
Okay.
We
Other
already
board
have
members?
that. I just want to make sure.
You're good? Well, we're not appropriating tonight. I think we just need to look at the direction, and I do think the monthly expenditures over revenue is probably the way to go, because we just can't pay. It's not like you can divide the budget up into 12 equal parts and pay it. I mean, it just doesn't work like that. It's not how it's structured. But I guess this was more informational tonight than anything, just to give everybody an idea of where we could go and what we could do. I mean,
when you have to decide that is when, you know, say we have the public hearing on the budget, you need to decide then, hey, we want to do a quarterly appropriation so we can bring you at the appropriate time the quarterly appropriations. I can't bring you a yearly appropriation like we always do, and then you make a motion you want to do it quarterly, because the numbers, I can't just divide those by
turn your
correct.
mic on, Nancy.
Oh, yeah.
We could ask for the monthly.
We bring you the monthly every month.
Every month in
Yeah,
our
we
packet.
bring that to you every month.
But then in responding to Mr. Black's question, that pushes the work to Ms. Kern's office and not the finance director's office, right?
That is correct.
But Ms. Curran, you said that was just a report you could run? It's not like you've got to sit down and do it by hand?
It is a report that we can run and import from the AS 400, so it shouldn't be time consuming.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Item 6A. Mr. Thomas and I have had discussions. Mr. Cully and I have had multiple discussions. It looks like everybody's moving towards testing as this pandemic moves forward. And I think in the discussions we've talked about actually getting some tests bought for just the county so that we could use it as a tool as we need folks to be tested. And I think it's going to be mandatory at some point, and everybody's going to be scrambling for tests. So one of the ideas Mr. Thomas had was to just go ahead and go to PACS Urgent Care and order 200 tests set aside for the county. So if you need to do testing, you're not wondering where you're going to do it and how you're going to do it or where you're going to do it. The other side of this, as I thought about it some more, is if we send employees and we have them bill their health insurance, they're going to have a $35 or $50 copay, and the rest of it's going to hit our insurance fund. if we buy these up front, we can actually save our insurance fund on the backside, which may be even more beneficial.
What's the total cost for the test?
Right now, the total cost is $13,500 for 200 tests.
15,500.
And that's the test and the, tested result. That's you
Complete.
buying the test and completing it. It was about 50% savings.
Does just out of curiosity, I mean, because that only tells you if you're positive today. I mean, does that include the antibody?
I think it includes the antibody, but I would need the chief back in the room to,
The test that we got, or the test that PAX got directly from China, was the antibody test. And I spoke to their business manager the other day, and it's a 15-minute test that tells you whether you have the antibody in you or you're totally positive.
Can you explain the antibody? I don't know if you know any more than the rest of us about the antibody side of this and or the positive side of this, because I hear you can be positive with an antibody or negative with an antibody.
That's probably above my pay grade. The
Okay, I didn't
physician
know if
probably
you
need to
knew
order
or
that.
not.
No, I know what Mr. Thomas just said, that yes, it does test for the active virus and it does test for the antibody if you've had it for COVID-19. So,
So just out of curiosity, how would we administer these? Would it be, I mean, as far as, would it be someone who, is it for just employees? Is it employees with family members? Is it, there are family members too? Is it for, I guess that would be the question, if someone is sick or someone feels like they had it. I mean, I guess the details would be the only question I have.
we've sent recently one employee to have a test that we sent home because their spouse had tested positive. So I think we would use it on a situation like that, at some point.
Is there,
And you probably, with a situation, you're going to have,
yeah.
somebody's going to have a test to come back to work if they're living with a spouse that
Yeah.
that sort of had it positive, they've gotten over it, but you don't know when now the
Right.
the employee's not an asymptom
Exactly. I mean,
person, so you
exactly.
probably would use tests to clear people to come back to work as well. So.
Okay, and so that could be a policy that, Chief, you could help, and you could work with,
I mean, I guess we're in the realm, no, Chief Loftus, we're in the realm of the unknown, so I don't know what you've heard on all the calls. I just see we're moving more and more to testing. Everything I hear is, 2 weeks ago it was just go home, and now as the test is available, it's like they want to test folks to move them back into the workforce. So I'm just looking for an avenue for the staff to have something local and easy.
yeah, to answer both of those questions, and again, it's policy that this board or Mr. Cully could adopt. I think it needs to be for the employees, because again, it's incumbent upon us to make sure we have continuity of government. So whether it's deputies or EMS workers or office workers, I think those 200 tests, if that's what you choose to do, need to be for the employees only. The tests, we can't buy them directly and administer them. They have to be done under the license of a physician. So we would use PACS to do that.
Okay.
So that's why you have there's some cost there versus the test versus the administration.
Well, I think it's a
So-
great idea. I just want to make sure that there's some sort of set policy that we have in place.
I think we've got the bones of that policy now that we're using, and we're testing that as employees get sick and try to come back to work, and we're ferreting that out both on the timesheets and the testing. I think we have more people that are going to be needed to be tested, and it may be prudent to have some tests dedicated at PACS for the employees in case they run out. More and more people are realizing they can get tested there, and it's become a popular thing just to ease your own conscience if you're a citizen and you want to get tested just because.
Okay.
So.
Right, thanks, Chief.
And Chief,
And the other thing, Mr. Seeley, if I could add, the business manager at PAX has informed me that there is probably a week's lag time. It's a little bit less, but a week's lag time is really good from the time we actually purchase those tests till the time that they arrive. So we have to factor that in. If we order them today, we'll have them next week. We won't have them tomorrow.
Right, and that's my concern in our conversation is I just see the trend going to testing, and I don't want to be on the backside of that if we can do something now to secure the ability to give them tools to actually put employees back to work through testing. Mrs. Long?
yes, one point I will make is 200 is fine. These are new tests coming out. There should not be a problem with expiration dates. But let's
There-
make sure that
We
know
checked
how
on that, ma'am.
long-
There are 2 years, 2-year
2 years.
expiration.
Great.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, that's fine. And secondly, the antibody, I don't know about people medicine, but I know antibodies are good things in animals because that gives them resistance. Am I doing the same thought process for humans? If we get somebody who's been exposed and developed antibodies, they're the people that they want to draw plasma off of, right?
The predominant thought here is that if you have the antibodies to COVID-19, you'll be less likely to get it or get it in the future. There's some differences in the medical field whether you could get it again, but you're less likely to get it again if you have those antibodies in your system. How long they'll stay in your system, that's to be determined, through science and time. But
Right. Everybody's immune system is different.
it's important to know who's got those because they're less likely to go out and be infected. So from my standpoint and Major Mosier's standpoint, that's a key piece to know who's been infected just as much as it is who's infected now.
Right, so in the future, we might be looking at doing titer tests on people when we get to that point to make sure they have titers. All right, thank you very much. I just wanted
What
to
is
make sure it was.
what is the capacity of PACE, Mr. Thomas or Mr.
Back-
Steve?
Yeah,
Okay.
they are basically, when I talked to her yesterday, they're basically running full strength. And I asked her if she needed another nurse and she said yes. So I don't know if anybody has a nurse that they know of that's at home that could work there, but they are running fairly well. They would create a day for just county tests if that's what we really needed. But
So
the
how
key
many tests, did she say how many tests they have at this point?
she did, but she told me not to say.
Okay,
So we're going to have to appropriate the funds for this, but I think at this point in time with where we are and what we don't know, that I don't think 200 is an unreasonable number. Mr. Cully, I don't know if you've done any of the math. And Chief Loftus, any thoughts on numbers?
At 200 tests, you're looking at 13,000. You'd have to put 5,000 up front for those. I think that's a good start. I think testing will become, in the future, faster. So I would think that's enough to get us through the interim right now. So,
Okay.
So
when
how
I mean faster, there's other tests. Abbott's coming out with tests that are getting FDA approval. There's other testing mechanisms out there that are being improved, but just don't have approval at this point.
And Mr. Chairman, I would say that as more tests come out and more companies are producing them, prices are probably going to drop also.
So do we go with 200? Do we go with 100? I mean, what's the pleasure of everybody? Everybody's heard the same things.
We go with the 200 we have. I mean, we know what that is, and there may be people who get tested multiple times. So that should last us a couple of months. Should.
but is the funds that we set aside, from everything I've read, I thought the deductible was supposed to be refundable back, or no deductible would be occurred by the person testing for COVID-19. Is that not true in the state and federal? They're not following that guideline that they put
Mr.
out?
Cully is telling me that's true.
So we could possibly recoup that 13.5. So it would make sense to do it, I would think. To put the money in there for those 200 tests.
Well, just remember, we're self-insured, Mr. Underwood, so it would come out of our healthcare fund.
Right.
So
But our employees
Pay for it
have,
up front. It's cheaper than trying to rebate it back out of the healthcare fund that we're managing.
yeah, but our employees have health care. And anything for that deductible is supposed to be refunded.
Oh, you're talking about people outside of the pool that we have? Because remember, we're self-insured for our employees that that have health care with the county, we're self-insured.
But what they're saying is that they didn't say just people who are that were self-insured. They say any funds that you spend for testing is going to be refunded.
Two things here, maybe I could try to answer that question. PACS is cutting us a 50% discount on the total cost if we do direct pay to them. So that's one option. The other option is we can try to get reimbursed through FEMA, just like we're spending on supplies, try to reimburse the cost of that testing through them. That's a hit or miss, so you all know that. But Mr. Underwood, you are correct. If you go there as a citizen or as an individual, the cost of that test is much higher. Yes, it's being defrayed by your insurance and by federal subsidies. So I don't know how that plays for us. The second thing, I think we want tests reserved just for the county employees, not to be used for the general public. That's all. I don't know much about the details of the federal process, but.
Okay. Thank you.
You want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we go ahead and purchase 200 tests from PACS Urgent Care in the amount of $13,000.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We also have to make the appropriation, and I think the appropriation's $13,500.
That was part of my motion.
It's just making sure, because it was kind of, you meant 13.5, correct, Mr. Thomas?
Oh, the number I have in front of me is 13. So 13.5, I will amend that.
Okay.
I'll amend my second.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Agenda item 6B. Mr. Underwood, you brought it up. I'll let you start it off.
Yes, Mr. Seeley and board members, I don't know if you know that Ms. Mavis Lewis is the chairperson for the Board of Social Services, and she called me, I guess, sometime in March, and was concerned about concerns about the level of treatment or professionalism, whatever you want to call it, and there were concerns. I know all of you have received the emails going back and forth, comments about the director in particular, and inquiry about her level of efficiency. And you see that they are disgruntled. And I've talked to Ms. Lewis several times. I've talked to Ms. Sneed once, to the point that you saw the letters that were sent out. And I'm very concerned that something has some resolve has to come about. And I don't want us to, for me, anytime we respond to an individual, we respond to that individual, not as the board, but as our individual selves. And I think there's been some misunderstanding or some lack of communication, and it's creating a very poor working relationship with Department of Social Services. I think you all read the letters. They've asked for a different representative from this board to sit in. Mr. Seal and I talked probably for an hour, at least an hour yesterday, I believe, if I'm correct, Mr. Seeley, maybe longer. Mr. Seeley seems to think that the issue is how things are done, but I still have a concern. I just believe there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and I have a true concern.
Okay.
Mr. Black?
No, go for it.
But no, go ahead.
I also, I'm also concerned about the emails that we've been receiving. And I understand there's been some concerns about some things in the department as well. And I do believe that we have to have a solid relationship with that department.
Mr. Forehand?
With that said, I did read the guidance from Mr. Emerson, and there's obvious that there is some conflict, but it's conflict. It's not everything is conflict free, and it's no different than anybody than one individual on this board that is adamant and potentially disagreeable with the other five. Do the other five say, well, we don't like that you disagree and we want to get rid of you? Because I'm equating that scenario to what we have right now. And looking at the guidance from Mr. Emerson, he said it's a pretty high bar to reach, and I haven't read anything in any of the emails that even comes close to reaching maybe that bar as well. So I think we need the relationship. I think that I would encourage everyone to try to get along, but as far as this board doing anything, I think that's very premature and not really in anyone's best interest at this point. So.
Mrs. Long?
All right, everybody else except for Mr. Thomas, and I'm sure he'll be right behind me, has chimed in. I also have read the emails. And as I said before, we all serve on committees. However, this committee is different in that this is a department that's headed actually by Richmond, and therefore the representative to the board is one of 7. Going back to Mr. Forehand's example, yes, sometimes we disagree on a board and we don't always get our way. The important thing to do, in my feeling, is after the vote is taken, the decision is made, you work with that. You got to stay within the group with open communications and not go outside the direction of the board that you serve on. Communications, when they fail, are the root of all failure in our lives and in government management. We have to be honest, but we have to accept we don't always get our own way. We work to make things better. So I think as we are representatives on multiple different boards, we have to remember that we are representing our board in our county and acting accordingly. If there is an issue, it needs to be brought back quietly or one-on-one to the board. None of us can go making decisions for the county as a single person. Therefore, if we're going to continue with representation on this board, we need to work with the people who have been appointed, who work with the director in Richmond, who works with our DSS department. And we need to make it work together for the best of everybody. If not, it is up to the director of Richmond to decide what he wants or she wants to do. That is my feeling. If we're going to serve, let's do it with an open mind and an open heart as a unit. Thank you.
Mr. Colley?
Can I add some clarity to the local social service board is what's called an administrative board. And so they manage the local social service department. Richmond has a social service board for the whole state, and they set various policies that have to be carried out by each local social service board. But the employment of and the actions of the director in any local social service department that is managed by the administrative board, and every one of them has an administrative board. Some administrative boards are appointed as one person, usually the county administrator, and then it's run as a department. But the ones that have a board like we have where it's actually a board, that board has a duty to oversee the management and the personnel. So there's not somebody above our social service director that's her immediate boss. Her immediate boss is the board. just like
Board.
my
Local
immediate,
bo-
my
local
immediate,
board.
my immediate boss is the 6 of you. There's nobody in Richmond that oversees me. They have an HR department in Richmond. They have rules she has to follow, just like I've got all kinds of state laws and state things I have to follow. But so this board is administrative. There can be what's called an advisory board, and they advise on how they do things, you know, how programs they might run, or, you know, Christmas drives and things like that. And then the county runs them as a department, and the social service director works as a department head. We don't have that model. And so this board does oversee. So it's not, yes, there's a state organization, but they don't come down, they won't make that person come to work. I've experienced this in my other county, where I call for help from the regional director, and they go, we don't manage the local director. That is the local board responsibility. And so they've got all kinds of things, but it's not, they're not our director's boss.
However, my question is, as far as making a change on the board, from what I read in that email, that has to come from Richmond. Therefore, if they have an issue, they send that issue to, they contact Richmond, correct?
No.
The state code, and Ben, you can jump in here, that I sent you, it's 2 ways that the board member can be removed from the board. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, that's correct. One, the Board of Supervisors can remove their appointee for cause. They have to find that there is cause to do it, which I believe is a fairly high bar, but frankly, it's not defined anywhere. But it's a pretty high bar. And the state board can also do a removal, but they also have to have cause to do that. So those are the only 2 ways that a member can be removed. It's sort of similar to removing a member from the planning commission once they've been appointed, or other bodies that are appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Mrs.
Okay,
Long?
I have a question. So if that is so, everyone serves by terms, be it, you know, we reappoint to commissions once a year.
Correct.
They have a term of
4 years.
4 years. So if we want to make a change at some time, we need to think about the timing of terms to make it easier. And also, perhaps we think about doing a research committee on doing it in the other way, which I realize is not the year to do it because our funds are going to be affected. We can't afford extra staff this coming year, but maybe in the future, we think about doing it as a department, not as a committee. But we don't need to make rash decisions on that at this time. It is what it is. If they've got terms that have to expire and people be reappointed, maybe that's the easiest thing to do, is to try to get along, calm down, and let terms expire and reappoint accordingly.
My concern, board members, is this. If an employee of the county calls Mr. Cully negligent and irresponsible, and I'm going to recommend that person who works for Caroline County be terminated. Employees have to follow a chain of command. You don't go out here and blast people because you think as an employee that someone, the first thing you do is go to the person you have an issue with and follow the policies and procedures that are in place. Now, I've read these emails now, and they are absolutely horrendous, and they all point to, oh, this person is wrongdoing, even from Dr. Stern. It's unacceptable. And I don't care what anyone says at this point. I have a deep concern, and this board ought to have a deep concern, There is something wrong when a person says that feel they're being harassed. There should be an action, and it should not have to be a legal action. When a person says you're creating environment that they can't work in, we cannot allow this as this body. And if we do, shame on us. I'll let you do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to put it on the table. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. And like I said, Mr. Seal and I talked for an hour. This is not about disagreement. This is about professionalism. It's about how we treat people. And for people to call, if a person called me and complained about Mr. Cully, who works for the Caroline County, I would send them to Mr. Cully. I wouldn't send out an email. I wouldn't try to give a person fuel. It's just wrong. And that's all I'm going to say. And I just think we are on a slippery slope. And that's my comment.
I have one thing. I mean, I understand what Mr. Forehand said, and I appreciate that because we all don't get along from time to time. My concern is that last email that came out. I mean, the email from the Social Services Board itself, okay, and that kind of follows what Mr. Forehand said. So my concern is the email that came from Ms. Sneed, and the very ending of it, as far as accounting is concerned. So that's where my biggest concern on this whole thing has come from, is that last email from her that we received yesterday.
I've had that about 100 times said to me, so maybe my skin's a lot thicker, but people are going to do what they're going to do. People use that phrase that you're referring to an enormous amount to make people like us, to push us to make a decision that we may or may not want to make. Because anyway, I'll just leave it at that. It's that statement doesn't concern me. And
Mr. Forehand, I just went through a lawsuit about people making accusations, and I'll tell you, it doesn't give you a thrill to do it, but there are principles that we have to uphold. We are the governing body of this county, and we ought to be above reproach at all times. And when a person says that to us, we have to take a look at ourselves. We can have disagreement. I disagree with you many times, with Jeff many times, but I'm not going to make disparaging remarks about him. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick to the fact. And it's unfortunate that we hear, but when I first heard about it, I asked for a conversation about this. And was told that, and Mr. Cully said that, the interpretation may have been wrong. But I wanted to put it on the table then. And now that this has happened, look at all of the junk in the email. Like I said, I'm just disappointed at best.
I'm going to conclude agenda item 6B. Do we want to take a couple-minute break before we go to public hearing?
Mr. Sealy, before you take that break, Mr. Black mentioned the last email, and I just went to look at it. Mr. Emerson was not copied on that last email, and I'd like us to make sure he gets copied and maybe give us some legal advice. So he does have it? Okay, Mr. Emerson, you have it? He's not answering.
Muted.
He's still on. Okay.
Sorry, muted. I'm not sure I know which email you're speaking of.
The email that Mr. Black referred to that came from the Social Services Director, addressed to all the board members and all of the Social Services Board.
Date and time.
3:08 yesterday, Monday afternoon.
The audio cut out again. Okay, your audio cut out again, I'm sorry.
I sent that to you yesterday at 3:08.
Right, and I don't have it in front of me, but I'm not sure what your question is. I mean, she obviously is upset and was making some allegations, but I mean, we don't have any. I mean, people make allegations all the time. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what your question is.
I would like your legal advice as to how to pursue based upon that letter.
Okay, I can't give you that tonight. We can
Given, sent to us by email.
we can look at it and come back to you.
Okay, that's what I was looking for is, whenever you come back or whatever. Okay, thank you.
Be happy to do that. Sure.
We're going to take a 10-minute break before we go to public hearing. We will be back here at 7:45.
8 minutes.
calendar year 2020 tax rate. Did he leave? I guess we have one letter that was sent to us, and I think we said we would read these into the record. This is from Bonnie and Clyde Cannon of the Bowling Green District. Dear Caroline County Board of Supervisors, we are writing with regard to the 2020 tax rates publicized hearing held on April 14th. We are unable to be present at the public hearing being held, but we are opposed to any tax rate increase for the upcoming budget year. With the present public health threat posed by the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, which is deeply affecting the nation states, nationwide states of recovery, we feel that a tax increase at the present time is not in the best interest of the citizens, most especially senior citizens such as ourselves on a fixed income. Thanks for your much during this pandemic. Be safe during this pandemic, Bonnie and Clyde Cannon. That is the only correspondence we have received, and my understanding is there is nobody here for public comment. So I can close the public comment period. It is now closed. Board members' thoughts, comments?
Mr. Emerson did advise you can.
Did I? Oh, you.
Open the public comment.
Mr. Thomas, I think you're correct. I'll open the public comment, and I've read the one that we had in reserve from the Cannons. Anybody else wishing to speak? Anybody else?
There's nobody here.
Around? Anybody in the other room?
Unless the press wants to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I was focused on the letter. Hearing none, the public comment period for the tax rate is now closed.
And Mr. Emerson did opine that you can adopt a rate tonight, which would be helpful so we could get the tax tickets prepared.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Long.
I know I was the one who brought up advertising for rates of 2 or 3 cents so that we would be prepared to do whatever we needed to do. But seeing that we are still all confined and that this is going to be definitely a year that's going to stress people, including our budget, I would suggest that we not have a rate increase this year. However, make it well known that next year, I don't think we're going to be able to avoid doing something more than a 1 cent tax rate increase, which isn't even going to touch us. So we may be looking again at me coming back with a request for a 2 or 3 cent increase to keep us in good standing with our bond rating and our debt level. But my motion tonight would be to not change the tax rate.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second.
We added some new classifications. Could you adapt?
Oh, you got to adopt all the classes.
Can you just adopt? I understand what you're saying, to leave them all the same, but just to adopt the real estate rate at the current year's rate.
There's a whole list.
And then adopt everything else on that page as advertised. So the only change you're making is not to go up the penny.
It is the proposed 2020 tax rates. It's the third page in on agenda item number 3.
Oh, I'm going backwards.
Do y'all understand?
Third page.
Yes.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
So put everything to FY 19 rates, except including those new ones we added in at the request of the Commissioner of Revenue, which are all 0 rates. So it's just new classifications.
You want me to read
It's the
this
bottom
whole
of the
thing?
page.
No, but just
No.
refer to that page, but with
Okay.
the F9, to remove the 1 cent increase proposed for all real estate categories and to adopt the rates basically as FY19 except for the 2 new categories.
Right. So let me try this. I move that we adopt the tax rates as presented in our board package under section 3 on page 3, with the exception of no increase in tax rate, leaving the real estate tax rate at 83 per hundred of assessed valuation, and adding the new
Category.
category of alternative personal property tax rate of privately owned pleasure boats, watercraft, motorized and under 18 feet used for recreational purposes as stated in Virginia Code 581-3506A28, which is at a rate of 0 cents per hundred. Does that do it?
I have a motion, Mr.
I'll
Forehand.
amend my second to that.
All right, I have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Huh? Ben?
What'd I do?
No, sounds good. Yeah, I'm good.
Any further discussion? All in, Mr. Black?
I'd like to second the sentiments of Ms. Long. I mean, I don't think it's, I was also one of the supervisors that was behind advertising for the 1 cent. I don't think now is the time to do it, although there are needs that are going to need to addressed in this county when the economy turns around, hoping that this thing is a short-term problem and that by the time that we get to next year, we'll be able to see people back to work and the economy will be turned around, because this county does have needs. We have to address needs with the schools. We have to address needs with public safety and pay raises. So with that said, right, because of the current situation, I also am in agreement.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, motion carried. Any calendar events that need to be? I don't. Mr. Thomas and Mr. Underwood, did you both vote? Because we didn't hear you.
Oh, maybe because I was muted, but I did vote aye because I was one of the ones that didn't even want to advertise for the 1 cent increase.
I understand. Mr. Underwood, were you muted also?
I think I was, yeah, I voted aye.
Okay. Okay, now I hear you. Thank you.
Yep.
So you have a unanimous vote?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Any,
All I would, no, the calendar's pretty much clean. Our next meeting is a week early, so that's Tuesday, May
The 5th.
5th. We do need to schedule some sort of work session. We may could do it that night if we don't want to have too many meetings. You could also do a work session later in this month and have the budget public hearing that night as well. I'm usually, and you'll go back in my whole career, an advocate when you do twice your tax collection, get the budget done, adopted, and over with by May. This year is so unique in that basically the country shut down. It's hard to really get a gather on what revenues are going to be like for next year. So the longer we wait, while it's not advantageous for the schools right now, but they know we propose level fund, and that's probably as good as it's going to get. I don't see we just adopted the exact same tax rate. So there's, you may wait longer to adopt a budget just so we know better where we are. The later we wait into May even, hopefully we'll know whether we've reached our peak and whether we're coming back off of this, whether some of the country's opening back up. I mean, there's no need to rush it where I would normally be one going, let's get it done, let's get it done, let's get it done. I'm now flipped the other way. I don't see that as being advantageous to us at all, because the longer we wait, as we wait into June, the better off we'll be in knowing where the country is and where the county and where the state is going in this pandemic. So while I'm, like I said, not the only one wanting to put it off, I don't see any rush. If y'all do, we'll certainly put something together. And I've already reworked a lot of the numbers on the revenue side in what I proposed to you. The good news, and since that time, Mr. Thomas brought it up, I got with Davenport, and they did find a way to lease purchase the road. So we can borrow either $1 million or borrow the whole $2.4 million. And at this juncture, if I had to recommend that, that's what I'd recommend. That way we could keep what I was planning to put toward it in the fund balance. Even though that money, a lot of it was coming from the detention center, at this juncture, hanging on to all that with an unknown revenue stream, even moving into next year, I think is going to be the smartest thing to do. While I've been a big believer of for that and getting rid of it. I think with the change in the economy and the world, hanging on to our cash, and if we can finance it at the really low rates, then that's probably the smart thing to do. We'll get some businesses over there when the road gets built and pay off the loan, but
So
that would be what
you're-
I'd be recommending.
So you're in favor of us financing this 2.4 rather than doing 1.2 and 1.2?
I think it's the safest bet to hang on to our fund balance as best we can if
What
there's
would you be-
something we can finance.
What would you be financing for how many years?
I think what we looked at was 15 years for 2.4. The just to do 1 million was a lot shorter, but they can adjust that to whatever we want. But it was to try to keep the payments as low as possible moving forward, so that it's basically a penny of the tax rate going to pay that off, and
That
hopefully
would
we will
shift
make
into
that
operating
back.
though at that point. Well, that would be shifting into operating money rather than capital.
I just think at the unknowns of this moving even into the FY21 timeframe, that we'll be better off if we're hanging on to that cash and not giving $1 million to VDOT, $1.2 million next May. Maybe we'll be all right by then and we can do that, but I think.
What would you be, just out of curiosity, I'm not going to hold you to this, what would you be looking at for financing, roughly?
I don't remember. I can pull it up. I'll send it to you tomorrow.
Okay.
I got
All right,
it. I got it from Davenport. It's in a spreadsheet.
Mr. Cullen?
100,000.
Mr. Cully, how late can we wait to do this, to have a meeting? Normally, you want us to approve a budget, but you said you're not in a hurry. Give me
The
a
schools are the
deadline.
ones that need to know something, and that's the one that's going to jam up. You could vote. You'd have to have some sort of public hearing, though, to give them any kind of number. They know right now my proposal was level funded. I'm sure they're going to hope for more money, but I don't know exactly where that's coming from. That is the only department that's really held up, is the schools. Now, I'm not trying to purposely hold them up, but
Mr. Underwood?
Yeah, just ask Mr. Cully. Let's say if we finance this and things miraculously turn around and we're better off, what's the penalty if we paid this off early?
what they had given me was no prepay penalty, so we could pay it off at any time.
So I think that would be the best of both worlds, and if we were able to pay it off, but right now can hold our cash until we see where we are. So I think that's a smart move on my. Okay, thank you.
Our biggest dilemma is what the state's going to do. Mr. Thomas and I have experienced where the state makes us make payments to them for money they didn't send us. So depending on what, and I say that because the state's biggest loss of revenue is sales tax, fuel tax, because there's not much being driven around, and then withholding from employees because you've got less employees. So I don't know when we'll get the picture from the state, and I don't know what effect it's going to have on the school budget because they're counting on state funds coming. So if we wait a little while, we'll at least know what that situation's going to be. And I don't know that they'll know that until May or June, early June.
Right. Mr. Cully, is it possible to get from them, I know from the schools, from the being shut down, that budget thing that we got, that Mr. Finney would have presented to us tonight, they spend about 2.3 million a year on transportation. And I'm assuming that they've burned through about 75% of that budget, roughly, so that would leave, if you could get from them, I'm not sure if they're still paying bus drivers, but they're not paying for gas, or barely any gas, and I know they're doing some extra things, but what the savings is on the transportation side.
Just remember that's in their budget currently. We can't add it back.
Right.
Okay.
No, yeah, I understand that, but I'd just like to know.
Yeah, we'll ask them for what they think they've been able to save. They should have been able to save some. They've been, operating, doing meals, but clearly the buses are not moving
there's no
around.
substitute teachers being
Yeah, it's not,
hired.
right. Anybody that would, there's bound to be some semblance of savings. You would think even in their buildings, they would have been able to moderate their temperatures to what would be, more setback temperatures, and they'd be saving on HVAC, electricity, and gas, propane, and all those kinds of things as well. So I think there should be some savings within that, transportation being the biggest one, they burn a lot of diesel fuel. I don't know what a bus gets, but I don't imagine them before 4 miles.
Fill it up twice a week.
Yeah, so, and diesel's higher than gas. So I'm sure, and even though they went to March and they got in mid-May, they should be some, closing in on a quarter of savings on that department.
Right, that's what I was figuring today.
There should be some savings there, and they
I mean, is there any, I don't see any reason for a work session till we get into May at this point, because we don't even know when anybody's going back to work. I mean, we're all teleworking right now, and I don't know what that end date for us is.
So can you move forward with the instructions to them to assume flat funding?
I'll be glad to point that out. I would think that would be, that'd be as good as it's going to get.
And we don't know, and they won't know what their state funding is going to be, because I think I heard the General Assembly is actually going to get together on the Capitol Square in a week or two to actually talk about some of that. So I'm sure sales taxes is what I've heard from some of the other localities of what their losses are in sales taxes. Pretty amazing.
I think one of the things that we've been lucky, excuse me, one of the things I think we've been lucky about is I've heard out of Spotsylvania, I mean, what the school budget cuts are coming up there, and I think I heard King George today has a $2 million shortfall, or we've been fortunate on that front. So, yeah, I mean, there's other school systems in the area that are I think are going to be in more dire straits than ours.
As I said at the last meeting, it's a blessing and a curse to be a really rural community. Our budget's not heavily based off of a lot of retail because we don't have it, because we don't have the people. But you go to all those areas that have all the restaurants and the shopping centers and all those things that were closed down. Luckily for us, McKesson's still working, Value City's still working,
right.
Coastal still. Our big employers, other than the schools, are all still operating because of the type of business that didn't get closed down, where they've got those too, but they just have a big part of their revenue stream is all of the stuff that was closed down, and it's built into their budget. So all of them are suffering major losses a month by that being closed. And nobody knows yet whether the federal government's going to make any of that revenue loss up. So,
Thanks, Charlie.
Mrs. Long?
So, Mr. Cully, about when would you like us to have a work session meeting? Because that's what we're supposed to be on, is setting a date.
I would think if we did it at the May 5th meeting, because as Ben has instructed earlier, we really can't put anything on here that's not continuance of government. So you're not going to have presentations, you're not going to have zoning, you're not going to have anything that's not emergency related. So I think our next regularly scheduled meeting would be good. And then from there, we can decide when we want to have a public hearing, if we want to have a special meeting as a public hearing, or we want to move into June for the public hearing. I think by then we'll have a better opportunity. Yeah, so we have a better opportunity.
Could I ask a question when you're done? Yeah, Mr. Cully just mentioned that Mr. Emerson said we could only do continuance of government, but I understand Fairfax County had a full board meeting where they did normal business. So are they different than us, or we have different rules? What's the story?
There are different attorneys with different interpretations of the ordinance. We are relying a little bit more on the Attorney General's opinion, which said that under the ordinance that you adopted and the continuation of government, you can do essential, in your meetings, you can deal with essential matters that, if they were not dealt with, would cause irrevocable harm to the locality. There are apparently some lawyers out there that think that means you can do anything you want. There are a lot of people, other lawyers, that think that that means you cannot do that. You can only do things that you really need to do, like the tax rate and the budget and other things that would cause harm if they cannot be put off. If something can be put off for a month or two, put it off. And frankly, that's where I come down.
But we've got direction from VACO, the Virginia Association of Counties, that concurred with Fairfax. So I'm just wondering why there's so many differences and why we never got any direction from the state government as this is what you can and can't do, not an older law.
Well, there actually is a law pending before the General Assembly when they come back that some lawyers believe would help them in some ways, and I think school boards think it would help them more than localities. Frankly, there are quite a few local government lawyers that don't think it will do anything more than what we already have figured out we can do. So it's really, you have a mix. I mean, we're in an area that we've never been in before. We're trying to deal with open meeting laws under FOIA and being able to have public hearings and being able to have meetings to deal with what you need to deal with. But a conservative approach is to not deal with things that are not fairly time sensitive. And so that includes things, some zoning issues and some other issues. I think a court, if you were challenged, would give you a lot of leeway, frankly, in terms of what you wanted to discuss because of this unusual time that we're in. By the same token, I think that if there is something that can be put off without harming anything, you should put it off. And I don't know what Fairfax is doing and those people, frankly.
Okay. We'll just move on and we'll figure out what to do from here.
I think you have to look at it. I'm sorry. I think you have to, just to continue a little bit, I think you have to look at it at a facts-based inquiry. So every issue you want to discuss, you need to determine whether or not you believe that is something that is important enough to county government and the continuation of the county, et cetera, that it should be discussed now rather than be put off for a month or two. And I think if you make that determination and you have some basis for it, then I think that would be supported, and I think that would be okay. I'm sorry, it's not a black and white inquiry. It's not a black and white test.
From our actual council's recommendations, work section, I mean, we can turn part of the 5th into a work session. I mean, we're done this evening at 10 minutes after 8, and we've spent more time talking about whether we can extend what we can do at a meeting. So at this point, I think the 5th of May, we can plan on doing part of a budget work session. Everybody in agreement with that? Hearing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Or anybody with closing board comments? Let me back up a second. Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.